I didn't cry when my son changed the locks on my own front door. I didn't say a word when my daughter-in-law stood in my kitchen, with the yellow curtains I'd sewn myself 31 years ago, and told me the arrangements had already been made. I just nodded. That was my first mistake, they thought, letting them believe I had nothing left. I had lived in that house in Clover Ridge, Ohio since 1987. Bought it with my late husband when our son was barely walking, and the neighborhood still had dirt roads past the church. We planted the oak tree in the backyard together. He measured it every spring with a piece of twine. When he passed, 9 years ago now, quietly, the way he lived, I kept measuring it. Alone, but I kept measuring. My son grew up in that house, learned to ride his bike in that driveway. I fed him through hard times. I co-signed his first truck loan when he was 22, and irresponsible and too proud to say thank you. Later, when he married, I welcomed her. I really did try. She was the kind of woman who rearranged your furniture while you were in the bathroom and then smiled when you looked confused. The kind who said, "We just want what's best for you," in a tone that made your skin go cold. It started small, the way these things always do. A comment here. "Mom, you left the stove on again." I hadn't. I was making tea and stepped out for a moment, but I let it go. Then a suggestion. Wouldn't it be easier if we handled the bills, just to help? I hesitated. My son looked at me with those eyes he's had since he was little. The ones that said, "Please, just this once, trust me." So I did. I signed the power of attorney on a Tuesday afternoon in October, at the kitchen table, while she made coffee and my son explained that it was just a precaution. The lawyer they brought was a young man I'd never met. He spoke fast. I asked him to slow down twice. He did, but only a little. I didn't understand everything I signed. That is the truth, and I am not ashamed to say it. I was 68 years old. I had a little arthritis in my right hand, and I trusted my son. That was not stupidity. That was love. There is a difference, even when it costs you everything. Within 6 months, they had moved me. Not violently. Not in the middle of the night. That's not how it works. It works through 100 small conversations, each one reasonable on its own. The stairs are getting dangerous, Mom. The yard is too much to maintain alone. We found a lovely place. Really lovely. You'll have people your own age. Clover Ridge Gardens was 40 minutes from my house. It smelled like carpet cleaner and something floral, trying very hard to cover something that wasn't floral. My room had a window that looked out onto a parking lot. There was a television mounted too high on the wall. The bedspread was beige. I sat on the edge of that bed the first night and I did not cry. I thought about the oak tree instead. My daughter-in-law had taken my car keys the week before the move. "Just until you're settled." My phone was a flip phone. I know. My granddaughter had been after me to upgrade, and the plan was in my son's name. After the second week at Clover Ridge, I noticed my outgoing calls were being limited. Not blocked entirely, just monitored. When I called my son, she always seemed to already know what we'd spoken about. I had a friend from church, a woman named Lottie, who had been my closest friend for 22 years. We had seen each other through husbands and heartbreak and one very bad winter when both our furnaces went out the same week. When Lottie came to visit me at Clover Ridge the first time, my daughter-in-law happened to call during the visit. The second time Lottie came, a staff member mentioned casually that family had requested visitors check in at the front desk first for safety protocols. Lottie came one more time after that. She held my hand and said, very quietly, "Bev, something isn't right." I told her I knew. She asked if there was anything she could do. I said I didn't know yet, but I was thinking. Here is what nobody tells you about being put somewhere you don't want to be. You have more time than you've ever had in your life. No cooking, no cleaning, no yard, no errands, just hours. Long, quiet, available hours. I used them. There was a small library room down the hall. More of a cart, really, with donated paperbacks and 2 chairs. But the activity coordinator, a soft-spoken young woman named Petra, actually, I should say. The activity coordinator, I'll call her that, because she was so much more than her title. By the end of this, she noticed I wasn't joining the card games. She didn't push me to. She just started leaving things on the cart she thought I might like. A book on Ohio history, a crossword collection, once a legal self-help guide that I don't think she meant anything by, but I read the entire thing in 2 days. I learned about power of attorney, what it actually meant, what it allowed, what it didn't allow. I read about guardianship and about conservatorship and about elder law, and about the difference between someone acting on your behalf and someone acting against your interests. There is a difference, a legal difference. And I wrote down every word. The activity coordinator also let me use the common room computer during slow hours. She showed me once, never mentioned it again, and I understood she was being careful. I was careful too. I found the Ohio State Bar Association's referral directory. I found the name of an elder law attorney in Columbus. I found the phone number for Adult Protective Services. I wrote all of it in the back of the Ohio history book in pencil, light enough that you had to tilt it toward the light to read it. Then I waited. My son visited on Sundays. Sometimes, when he did, my daughter-in-law was usually with him, sitting in the one chair by the window and talking over me when I spoke. The visits lasted 45 minutes on average. I timed them. One Sunday in January, he came alone. He was quieter than usual. He looked tired around the eyes in a way I recognized from when he was young and had done something wrong and hadn't figured out yet how to tell me. I asked him directly. I said, "What did you do with the house?" He looked at the wall for a long time. Then he said they'd taken out a home equity loan, that the house was collateral, that it had seemed manageable at the time. I asked how much. He told me. I did not react. I have had 68 years of practice not reacting to things I needed to think about first. I asked about my checking account, the one we'd always kept separate, the one with my name only on it, the one I'd deposited 30 years of occasional income into. Sewing alterations, a little bookkeeping for a neighbor's shop, the money my mother left me. He didn't answer right away. That was enough of an answer. After he left, I sat in the library room until dinner. I didn't read anything. I just sat with my hands in my lap, and I thought about my options with the same focused attention I used to give to a quilt pattern. What pieces do I have? What do I need? Where do I begin? I had no car, limited phone access, no cash on hand. My legal signature had been co-opted. My house was leveraged. Mice didn't know yet. But I had my mind, which they had never questioned, and which was, I have to say, considerably sharper than any of them understood. And I had the activity coordinator, who trusted me, and who, I was fairly certain, would help if I asked the right way. I didn't ask her to do anything illegal. I want to be very clear about that. I asked her a question. I said, if a resident needed to make a private call, not to family, just to say a professional, is there a way to do that without it going through the main line? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said the facility had a landline in the back office that wasn't tied to the resident phone system. She said staff used it sometimes during breaks. She said this while looking directly at a spot on the wall 2 feet to the left of my head. The way people do when they're telling you something they want you to understand, they didn't technically say. I thanked her for the interesting information about the phone system. 2 days later, she left her break schedule on the library cart by accident. It showed she had a 15-minute break at 2:15 every afternoon, and that the back office was generally empty between 2 and 3. I called the elder law attorney on a Thursday. His name, I'll call him the attorney, for his privacy. He was patient and deliberate, and he asked excellent questions. He asked me to describe my cognitive state, my daily functioning, my understanding of the documents I had signed. He asked whether I had any independent documentation of my assets. I told him about a safety deposit box at the First Savings Bank on Millbrook Avenue. The original box my husband and I had opened in 1989, which was still in both my name and my late husband's estate, which my son had apparently not thought to look for, or perhaps not known about. The attorney said that was very interesting. He said that if I could get him 3 things, a copy of the power of attorney document, a written statement from a physician confirming my mental competence, and access to that safety deposit box, he believed we had a strong case to petition for revocation of the power of attorney and potentially an emergency protective order regarding my assets. 3 things. I wrote them down in the Ohio history book. Then I started working. The power of attorney copy was the easiest. My son had filed it with the county. Standard procedure, the attorney told me. And it was technically public record. The activity coordinator helped me submit a records request online. It arrived in 6 days. The physician statement was harder, but not for the reason you'd think. Dr. Whitfield at Clover Ridge was a decent man, but he was careful. The way people are careful when they know they're working inside a system that has complicated relationships between residents and their appointed decision makers. When I told him what I was trying to do, he was quiet for a very long time. Then he said that in his professional opinion, as stated in my intake records, I showed no signs of cognitive impairment. He said he could put that in writing. He said he would date it that day, not retroactively, and that he would send a copy directly to any attorney I named. He did not say anything else about it. Neither did I. The safety deposit box was the problem I turned over the longest. I had no car, no cash for a taxi, even if I could get to a phone to call one. The box required my physical presence and my signature. I thought about this for 4 days, and then I called Lottie. I called her on the back office phone on a Tuesday at 2:20 in the afternoon. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she had been waiting, which meant the activity coordinator had perhaps mentioned something to someone, and I decided not to ask any questions about that. I told Lottie what I needed. I told her I needed a ride to Millbrook Avenue on a Thursday when my son was at work, and my daughter-in-law was at her part-time job at the dental office, which I knew from the Sunday visits when they mentioned schedules in front of me as though I was furniture. Lottie said, "What time?" Getting out of Clover Ridge wasn't the dramatic escape it might sound like. I had not been declared legally incompetent. I had not been involuntarily committed. I was a resident, not a prisoner. Whatever it had felt like, I was allowed to leave. I asked the front desk if I could go to a medical appointment. The activity coordinator had noted in my file, without being asked, that I had an upcoming follow-up with an outside specialist. Lottie pulled up at 10:15 on a Thursday morning. I walked out of Clover Ridge Gardens with the Ohio history book in my purse, wearing my good blue coat, and I did not look back at the parking lot window. The safety deposit box held exactly what I remembered: my original marriage certificate, both our birth certificates, the deed to a property my mother had left me in rural Kentucky, a small piece of land I had not thought about in years, farmland that had been leasing to a neighboring operation since before my mother passed, and which I had received annual payments for, automatically deposited into the savings account, the account my son had apparently found and began redirecting. And there was a document from 2019, a letter from a property management company in Kentucky, stating that the leasing arrangement had been evaluated and that the land, based on recent mineral surveys in the area, had accrued significant value due to natural gas deposit findings on adjacent parcels. I sat in Lottie's car in the parking lot of First Savings Bank, and I read that letter 3 times. The land, 11 acres of unremarkable field I had not visited since I was a girl, was now worth somewhere in the region of $420,000. It was mine, outright, not covered by the power of attorney, which only listed my Ohio accounts and my primary residence. The Kentucky property had been my mother's, transferred to me alone. They had never known it existed. I asked Lottie to drive me to the attorney's office. The weeks after that moved both faster and slower than I expected. There were documents. There were affidavits. There was a deposition in which I sat across a conference table from my son and watched his face go through things I do not have adequate words for. My daughter-in-law was not present. Her own attorney advised her not to be. The elder law attorney filed to revoke the power of attorney on the grounds of misuse and breach of fiduciary duty. He also filed a separate action regarding the home equity loan, which my son had taken without adequately disclosing the risk to the asset holder, me, because he had used the POA to represent my interests to the bank without actually representing my interests. We also contacted Adult Protective Services, not out of anger, but because the attorney said it was the legally appropriate thing to do when financial exploitation had occurred. It became part of the record. My son called me twice during this period. The first time, he was angry in the way people are angry when they've been caught. The second time, he was quiet, and he said, "Mom, I didn't think." I said, "I know." I didn't say anything else. Not because I had forgiven him, not yet, but because there was nothing left to explain that the documents didn't already say more clearly than I could. I did not go back to Clover Ridge as a resident. Lottie had a spare room, which she had offered me the day I called her from the back office phone, before she even knew what for. I stayed with her for 11 weeks while the legal matters resolved. We ate dinner together every night. We watched the news and argued about it the way we always had. She taught me to use a smartphone, finally, and I will admit it is more useful than I expected. though I still find the keyboard unnecessarily small for a person with dignified hands. The house, my house, the one with the yellow curtains and the oak tree, was returned to my sole ownership as part of the legal settlement once the home equity loan was properly structured and my son took on responsibility for the payments he had initiated. The Kentucky property money allowed me to retain legal counsel without hardship and to begin a fund I set aside specifically for a purpose. I'll explain in a moment. When I walked back into my house on a morning in late April, the oak tree had just started budding. I stood at the back window for a long time. I went out to the yard. I found the old piece of twine in the garden shed, right where we had always kept it. I measured the tree. The activity coordinator left Clover Ridge 3 months after I did. She is now working for a nonprofit that advocates for elder residential rights. I know this because she sent me a card, and because I sent a donation to that organization in an amount that I will keep between myself and the IRS. Lottie's granddaughter took the photo that I used for a speaking event I did at the senior center last fall. I wore the blue coat. I have been asked often what the lesson is. People want there to be a neat one. Something they can write on a card and put on their refrigerator. I'm not sure it works that way. I think the lesson is that silence looks different from inside than it does from outside. From the outside, it looks like defeat. From the inside, when you're doing it right, it's just the sound of someone thinking. I thought for a long time. I learned things I should have known sooner. I found help in places I wouldn't have thought to look, from people who had no obligation to me but helped anyway. Because that is what people sometimes do. I never screamed. I never begged. I don't think it would have helped. But I did something harder than either of those things. I stayed quiet long enough to get smart, and then I got to work. That oak tree in my backyard measures, as of this past March, 11 feet and 4 inches around. My husband would have loved that number. He always said it was going to be the biggest tree on the block someday. He was right. He usually was.